We have some stragglers, but they're going to join us. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us to today's research series. I'm delighted to welcome Bill Blomquist and Cindy Lott. Blomquist is up at IU Indy, longtime workshopper. You all know him. This fantastic work on water. And we're delighted that he joined us today. And Cindy Lott from the Lilly School of Philanthropy, who we're delighted to have with us as well today. And they'll be talking about their new working group on Philanthropy Commons and the way they're thinking about that. So please join me in welcoming them. And then I'll make a really quick announcement about next week as well. So thank you for joining us. And then just a reminder, we have one colloquium on Monday coming up. Scott Page, please be there. All right, go for it.
Okay, good. Hey, welcome everybody. It's great to be here. It's always great to be back at the workshop. Cindy Lott, my colleague at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, is now also an Ostrom Workshop faculty member. So we have built that bridge, and along the way, I'll just give a little bit of background about how we came to have this conversation with you today. I noticed that Cindy sought out panels at both WOW 7 on philanthropy as a commons and at the IASC conference in 25, also a panel on philanthropy as a commons, and that she was a faculty member in the Lilly Family School on Philanthropy here at IU. And I thought, well, this is interesting. You know, this would be someone, to get to know. And so we've been in touch and have found lots of overlapping interests. She'll talk more about her work and what she's working on currently in a minute. But I just wanted to say that I've come to appreciate someone, a colleague with great expertise and really worldwide reputation in the field of research on law, regulation, and policy as it relates to the world of philanthropy. So she has a lot of, she is a philanthropic studies scholar with a particular interest in law, regulation, and public policy, which makes for a great overlap with the interests of folks at the Ostrom Workshop. So I threw up on this slide some things that we have mulled over at times. And what I really want to start off emphasizing is how distinctive IU is in the world of institutions, policy, and philanthropy. Because we're home to, of course, Ostrom Workshop, where we are today, but also the world's first school of philanthropy, the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and before it, its predecessor, the IU Center on Philanthropy, which was already kind of the global leader in research on philanthropy, nonprofit organizations, et cetera. And of course, the O'Neill School has, I think, the top grad programs in nonprofit management currently anywhere. So this is a kind of a Venn diagram of, institutions, policy and management, and philanthropy that has at the intersection of that Venn diagram, Indiana University, basically. So this is something that I never took the full opinion we should be great in. Advancing the study of governance and regulation in nonprofit organizations and philanthropy. But it has a special place in, my Ostrom heart. We're sitting here and our colleagues online can't necessarily see this, but we're sitting here, colleagues, in a place called the Tocqueville Room at the Ostrom Workshop, and with himself gazing upon us, as Cindy pointed out, beneficent. Throughout our deliberations. And, as influential as Tocqueville and particularly Democracy in America were to Lenin Vincent's thinking, part of that comes from the fact that we've always at the Ostrom Workshop been interested in modes of social organization beyond the market and the state. And so the whole third sector of nonprofit organizations and philanthropic activity is just part of why we're interested in what we're interested in at the Ostrom Workshop, all of the many different ways that people self-organize for collective action and to get things done. So this is a kind of a natural interest of ours. And then, as I said, to have the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy here at IU is just a really great opportunity for a fit and a collaboration in our opinion. So that's what brought us here. Now I'm going to hand off to Cindy because not only is she a renowned scholar in this field and a faculty colleague here at IU in the Lilly Family School, we somehow got her away from Columbia, and I'm glad we did. She's also launched a program here because I have come to appreciate what a hyper productive colleague she is. And so she
sleepless.
She got here and started a new doctoral program because that's what you do on your second day on the job or something like that. So we also have, in addition to a PhD program in philanthropic studies at the Lilly Family School, there's also a new philanthropy doctoral program that I'm going to ask you to share with everybody and tell folks about, please.
Sure. Well, thank you, and for the very kind words. And it's great to see colleagues from my other worlds too, online, and lots of other people know that this is happening today who couldn't join. But I actually live in Bloomington, and I've lived in Bloomington off and on all my life. I lived in Tulip Tree as a kid when my own father was in a doctoral program. So it's all coming home for me, raised my children here. So it's lovely to come back to Indiana and back to IU after all of these years. It's actually, I was thinking about this, that many, many years ago, I first heard about the colloquium series when I was doing something at the law school years ago here. And I remember thinking someday, and so it's really wonderful to now be here speaking to you all. So a couple things I wanted to mention kind of broadly in the same way that Bill just did about my own interests and why, for someone who's interested, my scholarly research is in charitable regulatory policy. So if you think about the intersection of those three words, charitable, regulatory, policy, it already was interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary to begin with, which put me as an outlier for most legal scholars that really are very focused on the law. It's very easy to have endless research projects in the law. But my interest was always in trying to translate law into other fields and how would we do that? And I've spent some time around that and working about translating legal issues and regulatory themes, if you will, at state and federal level into data that other scholars can use. My association with Urban Institute as longtime fellow there was where a lot of that work has happened. I'm thrilled to be at the Lilly School now. I've actually been here back 3.5 years with IU and now with you all, and I'm affiliated with O'Neill as well, because it does represent kind of the large multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary world that we exist in philanthropy and in the law, frankly. So I was interested in the WOW when it was here. I felt very lucky, wow, that I could get to the WOW in person. And much of it was about, of course, in your world, and I'm still learning a lot about Ostrom, and I've done a lot of reading, but I'm learning from all of you about a lot of the governance and the commons concepts. For me, the interest in doing legal and regulatory work was thinking how people function on resources and shared resources without the law. And that's one of the main areas for me, is thinking we've always self-organized. Law is a tool for that, which I always say, I hate to break it to the lawyers, but law is a tool. So my interest has always been in policy because law is an implementation and, an execution tool for policy. And policy grows out of how we think in communities, how we define that. And that's where the overlap really came for me. And I did already know Brenda Bushouse, who goes way back, and her husband Charlie, I've known some who goes back with Bill and Brent Never. The book that is listed as one of the resources here that will be coming out, I think is great and has a ton of my colleagues, either from the Lilly School or other people in the policy world that I know. So I think that book is a fantastic starting point for thinking about, as they say in the title, understanding the philanthropic commons. So
fantastic that you stayed up last night writing a blurb.
it's true. I wrote my first book jacket blurb, if they use it, for the book. Because I was one of the only not contributing authors, apparently, that they could ask. So that was all cool. So to move through, so I'm clinical faculty at the School of Philanthropy, and there's a reason for that. Because I really do still practice. I'm an attorney. I can practice, and I do when I need to and or want to, but also because I have one foot always in the real world about how things function. And I really appreciate that I have the ability to do that as a clinical faculty member. One outgrowth of that is true. I was hired at the Lilly School also specifically from being a policy fellow there and teaching there to launch the new professional doctorate in philanthropic leadership. And it is for mid-career and senior level professionals in the field who are working full-time. It is essentially an executive doctoral program. They're online. They're folks from all over the world, all over the US, coming to us for their next credential, if you will, but also their exploration for 3 years. And I've been back 3.5 years, and we're about to graduate our first cohort in May. So it's a big deal, but it reflects.
Welcoming your fourth cohort.
And we're about to send out letters to our fourth cohort. That's right, that we're inviting. But it reflects this real worldness, which I think the Ostrom Workshop also does. It has a real element of like what happens on the ground in communities or across, global spheres of specific areas, substantively water or energy or security or data, whatever those things are. And philanthropy has been around as long as humans have. We've only been regulating it for a while. So you can picture why my interests are broader than just the law, if you will, in this. And I think that's where the overlap happens with all of the colleagues writing in this book and other places. So we're hoping to generate a lot of good brainstorming out of all of you and the folks that couldn't be here today about ideas of where this could all go. We're not putting any parameters on it. Back to you.
All right, I'll take it. So I just want to throw the invitation out as questions arise or as ideas pop to mind. Please, this presentation is really just us putting a few slides up to guide the conversation and say, okay, here's how we started. Here's what we're thinking about. Here's some stuff that's currently going on. Where might we go from here? So that's what this research series presentation is like. It's not it's a little different perhaps from some of our typical research series presentations. Cindy and I are not here to share a paper with you and get feedback as much as to share an idea with you and see what you would like to do with it and see if it is of interest to you and if it's something you'd like to engage with. So let me move to this slide. Once we looked, right, the old saying, you can see a lot just by looking. Once we looked, we found that there was already some collaboration and some overlap between Ostrom Workshop folks and Lilly Family School folks. We just hadn't done much yet because the Lilly Family School is still pretty new for those of you who are also new to IU. The Lilly Family School of Philanthropy is still fairly new here. We hadn't built a lot of sort of institution to institution collaboration with the Lilly Family School yet, but some of the individuals had found each other. So as Cindy was saying, Brenda Bushouse and Brent Never are Ostrom Workshop affiliated faculty. Their homes are at the University of Massachusetts Amherst for Brenda and at University of Missouri, Kansas City for Brent. Third colleague in that group, Rob Christensen, also spent time here. at the workshop as a graduate student back in the day, and he's at Brigham Young University on the faculty there. And Brenda and Rob started talking to each other because they had drunk the Ostrom Workshop wine, and they think about the world in terms of things like common pool resources and common pool problems and the commons and things like that. And they all shared interests in philanthropy and nonprofit organizations also. And they got into a conversation at one time about whether philanthropic giving is a resource that is subject to risks of depletion or overuse or degradation, but also renewable. Is it a depletable but renewable resource? And part of their conversation was about whether there are things such as, and there's a term for this, it's pretty common now, talking about donor fatigue, that, you know, you get solicited so many times that you just start to tune out and disengage. So is donor, you know, to what extent is donor fatigue a real thing? To what extent has technological communication improvements multiplied the number of times and ways we are bombarded with requests for support? And so even for those who are generous of spirit and capable in terms of resources, do they at some point just start to feel overwhelmed and again, you know, disengage? Is philanthropy something that we can exhaust? Or is that spirit of philanthropic giving something that we can exhaust? But is it also renewable? Not necessarily on forever just because it gets depleted at some point. So Rob and Brenda and Brent got a group of folks together whom they knew to explore this. A few folks from the Common Pool Resources side of this question, and a few folks from the philanthropic studies and philanthropy research side of this question, and made for a very interesting combination. And lo and behold, Lori Paulberg, who's a faculty member at IU in the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, was part of that. Jen Shaker, who's a philanthropy faculty member here, also was part of that. And I was part of that. And so we collaborated. I mean, that Jen Shaker and I have a co-authored chapter in this forthcoming book that Brenda, Brent, and Rob are co-editing, and Lori is contributing a chapter from her research on United Way organizations and so forth. And we're part of a much larger group. That book has many chapters and many contributors, but it was one of those times when you sort of look at each other and you go, you know, you're IU, I'm IU, you know, you're doing this, I'm doing that, you know, maybe there's more here that we could build on. And so that book is coming out nicely from Cambridge University Press. I expect it later this year, I think, right? They're at the point where they're hitting people up for blurbs. So so it's got to be real. It's got to be real at this point. So that's just one example. We wanted to share with you some current examples of some research that's starting to take place with input from Ostrom Workshop colleagues and from the Lilly Family School colleagues. And then part of the reason that Cindy had to write that blurb late at night is because she's also working on a special issue of a journal, Nonprofit Policy Forum, which is also coming together.
Yeah.
And you and Elizabeth Boris go through the intro to that. So will you talk a little bit about that with folks and give a sense of what that's about?
Yeah, I'd like to, because the special issue, well, first off, it's special. They have never done a double issue for the nonprofit.
Oh, it's really special.
Super special.
All right.
It's double special. And I think what makes it truly interesting is kind of out of whence it arrived. Let me put it that way. A couple years, so this is part of a larger project that I helped start when I was at Columbia University, and Elizabeth Boris is very well known in the philanthropy field, and she started the first real data center around philanthropy at Urban Institute, the National Center on Charitable Statistics. She's done many, many, many other things over the years. And so we were colleagues, we eventually joined forces, not unlike what Bill and I are doing now. Many, many years ago, Elizabeth and I did, and we combined her data piece and my regulatory and law piece around nonprofits and regulation and how we would think about these things. And so over the years, every 2 years, we've had some form of conference or convening or symposium, and then we do some writing in between. And 2 years ago, we had a big one, and it was on, I had a really major one at Columbia University on the future of state charities regulation in 2013. Then I started doing original research. Again, clinical faculty, it was not my thing going through law school necessarily. I chose not to do a lot of that then, but now I find that I'm doing research in the space much more in the last decade, 15 years. And so we started producing and throwing off ideas for people in very many disciplines to be thinking about how it is that they are either, as we say in the law, enabled or constrained by law, right? And I was just mentioning to one of your colleagues here, I also have a deep interest in ethics in this space, which I think, of course, transcends all of these different fields, right? There's a relationship there too. So I'm doing some research there. So 2 years ago, we had this major symposium on the future of regulation nonprofits overall. It's federal and state in the US. We had a component around international. You know that the US is considered, quote, a model for a lot of philanthropic regulation and thinking about this space. That doesn't mean it's always a positive model. We have negative models out in the world. And we have a lot of countries that are still figuring out how or if they want to regulate in any real way. And by the way, we're still figuring that out in this country, which is one of the reasons why I think that the Ostrom Workshop could really help inform the way we think about how do we do the work in the philanthropic space. What's called philanthropy? How do we define it? All of those things. And a lot of that deck has been thrown in the air right now. So we wanted to explore that in the symposium. It's taken a bit, it's been a minute, as the kids say, about getting this thing published, because it turns out it's 16 articles out of the 2.5-day symposium. And it's all online right now.
It's a very,
It was, yeah.
16 articles is a very special.
They weren't sure if they could put it in one, so they did a double special issue. And all of the articles are online, but I looked again last night. I was going to include the link. You can't yet see the whole together yet on Degrader, but if you look at Nonprofit Policy Forum, very shortly we will be able to give it to you for all of the articles. And they span all sorts of disciplines, and they also span with some practitioners in the space. So we really do have people like Brenda. That's actually how I first met Brenda Bushhouse, was that she was actually using some of my legal data for her work in other worlds. And I'm like, yay, that was exactly the goal. I'll take the win, right? That's how we first met. And I think that's what, for me, I wanted to say today, to Bill's point, there are people doing this type of work already. They just didn't have a home. Ostrom is a natural home for some of this work, and for someone at the School of Philanthropy, obviously our colleagues at O'Neill, of which we have some online. These are important collaborations because we're all in and around each other's spaces, and we're not prone or wanting to be territorial about it. We actually want to be in each other's spaces, right? In thinking about this stuff. So Elizabeth Boris and I wound up writing this intro, which was not a peer-reviewed article, but is an intro to the entire journal, the special, double special issue. And I encourage you guys just to take a look, because you'll see it really does talk, and you can see that there's so many different walks that are coming into this space thinking about it. So that's an example, as Bill said, of people already doing the work. And I can tell you that over the many years, it's not easy. I will say that in the law, people keep legal scholars for the most part. They are with so much and so rich to explore. You don't often have to be utilized, in ways that you might otherwise, to go out with other scholarship. But we have a hard time having other scholars understand often how to do research in the law or think about how to utilize it and speak, I think, with inquiry around it in an easy way. And so these are always good opportunities to hear what are the best use cases for the way you could use information on law and regulation. And I want to hear what lives outside the law about this commons area and how we think about and it has few parameters. The philanthropic space, because it's as old as humans, why would it have that many parameters? Right? And we've only been regulating it in our own country for a little over 100 years, just know. But philanthropy is as old as all of us and beyond, right? So there's a lot there to explore that has nothing to do with the parameters that are created through institutions. And I think that's another component here that's really important, is around the exploration of the why of the institutions we do have in place. What is their purpose? And in our field, unfortunately, in my opinion, there's a lot of regulatory lag and there's a lot of obsolescence that needs to be looked at around the institutions for the current world.
And one of the things that caught my attention about that work that you're doing, and other people are doing too, is this what happens to philanthropy when there becomes an overlay of governmental regulation, and how much in the US in particular philanthropic activity is driven by the tax code. And this is something I've heard you talk about and something I've read other colleagues talk about. And then what happens to philanthropy once it becomes that tied to the tax code, and then people start messing with the tax code. Right. So we have to think about this both at a specific level of the interaction of regulation and philanthropic activity, but also at a sort of broader level about what does it mean for what is sometimes called the independent sector, the third sector, et cetera, to become so dependent in some ways on policy and regulation that shape what people will do, won't do, feel like they can do, and feel like they can't do. So I think that's a really rich area that you're already exploring, and that we can continue to explore. Law is a tool, but sometimes it's a tool that bounces back on us and shapes how we do things in a variety of ways. I'm just going to throw out one other, sort of examples of current research. So Jen Shaker and Bill Plater, who was one of the leaders of what was then the Center on Philanthropy and became the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, and I have been thinking about the host of policy changes affecting higher education institutions in the United States. Recently, you may have heard that there's a fair amount going on, and a lot of uncertainty these days. And we are raising the question now, what can philanthropy do? So the purpose of this article, hopefully forthcoming in Change magazine, is to raise the question with higher education leaders in the United States about what can be promising roles for philanthropy in assisting higher education institutions through this period of turbulence in terms of public policy and governmental action in the United States. And how can universities and colleges be more effective in their philanthropic endeavors to try to help sustain things like student financial aid, faculty research, and things like that are being disrupted in the current policy environment. So you can think about these relationships from a number of angles, like what is the effect of regulations on philanthropy and the nonprofit sector. You can also think about these things in terms of what can philanthropy do in response to changes that are happening in the world of policy and governmental affairs and so forth. Please.
Let me add on something else on this that kind of, I think, illustrates just how overlapping a lot of these issues are. And I'll take higher ed as an example. I love this article's coming out. I spent some time thinking about that. We actually have an initiative at the School of Philanthropy on higher education philanthropy. Most of higher education in the US is nonprofit. And people think about the boards, but not as much as they might have before 2.5 years ago or so. And suddenly boards and the donor class which you probably read in the paper every day for a solid year in the US, started really having a say. Boards are supposed to have a say. One can disagree about how much the donors should have a say once you give your donation, whether you have a say on the rest of it.
Right.
But that comes much of the argument around all of this comes directly out of the First Amendment, which is the baseline in the US for philanthropy. Its protections come out of the First Amendment: freedom of speech, freedom of association. And those things are all embedded in philanthropy. And I'm teaching a policy course right now to our Field E students. And that's like this week's, module was about the basis of that in the US. It's very different in other countries that don't have the equivalent of a First Amendment, but they try to work their way around in some way to, how are they going to think about philanthropy? That is something, higher ed in the last 2 years was this intersection of all sorts of issues. And you could literally use that as a case study for how we think about all of these intersections around institutions, the law, philanthropy, who governs that, how do we want to govern these public goods that are still very much regulated by government in some way, as we've learned, much more than some people even realized, right?
In Ostrom world, we talk a lot about trust. And trust is one of the things that comes up in this issue of higher education philanthropy as well. One of the things that Jen and Bill and I write about is about what Cindy was talking about, how much of a role should donors have. And over the past 2 generations, philanthropic giving to higher education institutions shifted from being mostly what we call unrestricted, and I'll unpack in a minute, what we call unrestricted gifts to being restricted gifts. Part of that is because restricted gifts are easier to get. If you are soliciting a donor and you find out what that donor is interested in, and then you sort of craft and ask around that donor's interest. Oh, wouldn't you like to give us money for this scholarship, for this program, or for this category of students, or for this particular faculty line of research, or for this particular department, or this particular division, or this particular school, or whatever? Those are called restricted gifts. The donor has said what the money is for. And the university or college then no longer has the discretion to employ those philanthropic dollars for other purposes. You've entered into an agreement with this donor. You've told the donor what you're going to use the money for. The donor has said this is what the money is for. There you are. Restricted gift. But one of the things that we encourage in this article is trying to get institutional leaders to shift a little bit of their effort and focus away from the restricted gift, which is easier to get because you're playing into the donor's interests. Here, wouldn't you like to give us money for this thing you already care about anyway? To a gift to the college, gift to the university, what we call an unrestricted gift. Those are harder to get. And what's at the core of that is trust. What you're asking the donor to do is to believe in the mission of the university enough to make the contribution to the university, and then let the university leadership figure out what the need, best use of those dollars are this year, next year, and beyond. That's a harder ask, right? And so, some of these recurring issues about trust in interpersonal relationships and in collective action and the role that it plays, come back around even into something as specific and practical as fundraising for your college or university. So
let me just add that trust is a legal term as well.
Yes.
That's not a mistake. The whole point of a trust is that you put resources into it for a time you will not control it or even possibly be around for it. I mean, a legal trust is just that. And it's always, I mean, these are very common law, as we say in the law. These are very common law concepts. What that means to me, if you think of common law, which again is a concept meaning not statutes, people didn't come up later and go, we need a rule. We need a law. There should be a law, and we're going to have some regulations and some rulemaking around it. Instead, these were things that came out of humanity and how we're all going to live on this island together. And we're going to figure out some mechanisms for it. And one of them was a trust, a charitable trust, which has been around very, very long time, even in the law. And it's that same concept that we see translated in different ways now through, is it restricted? How restricted is it? Right? That's a concept around how much trust. It's not only in the mission of the university. I would add that it's also trust in the management and the administration of the university, which is often a real issue. So again, higher ed is just an example, but it's a way of digging into these issues about how all of this is interrelated. I think is useful.
Great. So this is the point. This is the point where we invite. We've done a lot of sort of, here's how we got interested in this, and here's why we hope you might get interested in this too. But this is where we invite. Thanks to those from Workshop and the executive committee who launched this idea, we've created a working group. The working group is called Public Policy, Law, and Philanthropy. I just want to put a little asterisk and a quick note here, because on the website of the Ostrom Workshop, and we'll just get this updated, it's a minor point, we also were going to create a Philanthropy as a Commons working group. And and Cindy and Brenda were be the co-directors of it, but in conversation, Brent sort of thought that the policy, law, and philanthropy working group topic is broad enough that we could have just a working group on policy, law, and philanthropy, and the people who have this particular interest on the philanthropic commons just be part of that, rather than have what could conceivably be confusing for people, two working groups with philanthropy in the title. Here's the philanthropy as a commons working group. Here's the policy, law, and philanthropy working group. So we're moving forward with the working group called Policy, Law, and Philanthropy. It'll be just a minor update to the website to take the other one off the list for now. So suppose you think this is interesting. You folks online, friends, colleagues, suppose you think this is interesting and you'd like to stay in touch and you'd like to participate, you'd like to stay informed about what we're working on and so forth.
And give us your ideas about what we as a community should be working on or thinking about broadly.
You can join the working group, and joining, we're trying to keep it as simple as possible. Joining just means subscribing to our listserv, because that's how we're going to communicate together going forward. So, and the instructions for joining the listserv are even really simple. You don't have to write an email to anybody. You just type an email with this in the to line: policy philanthropy -L- subscribe at iu.edu. And somewhere there is either a bot or a vastly underpaid student on the receiving end of all of those who process them.
How did we pull this off? That's way too easy.
I think it is too easy, and I believe there's probably
We have not tried it, so.
yeah. There's probably
Tell us.
I feel a task force coming on.
Few meetings.
We're making it much too easy to join a listserv in the IU system, and I'm sure we'll find a way to bureaucratize this further. But for now, get in now. This is my pitch. Get in now while it's easy to join a working group by just typing that into the to line of an email. You can leave the rest of the email blank, or you can send us cat videos. I don't care, but just that's how you join, and then we'll just use the listserv going forward to about when we want to get together, when we want to get the working group together, when we want to have conversations. If there are opportunities like upcoming conferences or events or something that might be of interest to folks, and resources. And this is something that Cindy and I were talking about literally just, as we were coming up on 1 o'clock today, is that we need to also, create like a SharePoint folder or something like that, where we can drop in articles, calls for papers, things like that, that working group members will be able to access that way. We did debut this working group idea in November at Arnova. Now, Arnova, some of you know what Arnova is. If you don't know what Arnova is, it's the Association for Research on Nonprofit Organizations and Voluntary Action, Arnova. It's a pretty large group. Their annual conferences are, I would say, well attended.
They are.
Hundreds of folks.
We had less international students. It happened to be in Indianapolis this last November. Comes around because Indy and the Lilly School have a big role there, and O'Neill has a huge role in it too. It happened to be in Indy. We did a very informal call out. We had a nice little group that came. It's important to have PhD students as well as scholars that have been doing work in their various fields for a long time. So I was glad to see that. And we invite scholars of all levels and in all disciplines. It's very inclusive. So we did that, and we're hoping to have more. So this shared folder, I think, is going to be important to hear from all of you, and a way that you can communicate ideas so that we can put them back out there. And Bill will get to talk more about how this is done through Ostrom in terms of having meetings, and it's all up to us to do it. So, yeah.
We believe in self-organizing.
Yes, we do.
We believe it right down to our socks. Edu, what's up? And then I'm going to, Edu is got a comment or a question, and then Brenda herself is on here, and she posted something in the chat, and we're going to, Brenda, fair warning, I'm going to ask you to unmute and talk in just a minute and share any other thoughts, because you've been part of this conversation from early on.
You want to go online first? I just want to make a general comment.
Yeah, please, Edu, please.
So, first of all, I think the working group, you're launching it on a very solid footing, because this book and the community that has already been working on this, provides a great agenda for the working group. We had a chance to look at the book. The 21 chapters of the book, and so many of them engaged directly.
She got jealous and had to have a special issue that went down here as long.
But they're special too.
But there are several chapters that engage directly with concepts and analytical tools of the workshop, so it's already provoking something that I think benefits everybody, which is, in what ways, these long-standing concepts that are so foundational, in what ways, they are applicable, they are to new kinds of problems, new kinds of questions. So I think the conversation that you're having, in really pushing these ideas and concepts forward, it's something that benefits the workshop as a whole. So I think that, and that's, in part because you have already all this work and this wonderful book and community starting there. So, just for instance, in what ways the concept of CPR, works as a concept to talk about philanthropy or different kinds of philanthropy. So these are conversations that I think benefit everybody. There are, and that applies to the design principles, to the IAT, to polycentricity, to a number of things that I think, be interesting. I think there are, on my end of the, working on more environmental issues, human environmental issues, there are so many questions that are emerging now with the shifting funding between government, non-government, aid in particular, that has been throwing that balance away, and philanthropy and other kinds of pooled funds, for climate and everything. So this is in flux, literally, and in some ways, it's helping to define the agenda for environmental and climate issues. So that's a big area, I think, for research. And the other saying that we had our colloquium on Monday.
That's what I was gonna say, it just ties back to.
Ties
to-
very close. The
the
colloquium Monday
interpretation,
was asking question about the outcomes of funding, broadly speaking. Right, but that's another really interesting area, you know, as a researcher. What are the
What are the impacts, what are the-
impact? So I just want to share that it's really nice to see the working group already with a fantastic agenda launching together with the working group, and you're really touching on things that I think it's relevant to the entire workshop. So it's just that.
That's very kind. That's very generous of you. Brenda, Edu, being the gracious colleague that he is, was gonna let me have you go first. But I think it was probably even better that he got to say all those nice things about the book. And now you can unmute and talk about it in the context of someone who just talked about this good work.
Well, thank you. I'm sorry I'm late. I couldn't get here before now. And Edu, I just want to say thank you to the workshop because we're able to publish this book open access, and the workshop contributed funds to that. So thank you so much to the workshop. We really wanted this to be open access, so it could be free for the download for people to get to spread it far and wide. And I'm really thankful to Cindy and to Bill for, working to establish this working group at the Ostrom Workshop, and to all of you that are here. Bill, did you want me to say something more than that? Should I?
I just wanted to, since you've been part of this conversations from early on, and then of course the book preceded these conversations between Cindy and me because we hadn't even met yet. Just, your thoughts as someone who's been in this, been researching nonprofit organizations and their impact on collective action and so forth. Just if you had, the other thing that came to mind is that you have many thoughts of your own about where this sits in the Ostrom tradition. And just whether you wanted to add anything about that. I just wanted to open up the floor. I also wanted to give you a chance to amplify your chat comment about the Lisbon conference, which already got at least one like of other people who want to go to Lisbon. So you might have to say, yeah, so Allison already thumbed up to that one.
We're going to address that conference at the end here.
So there's a,
At the end, okay. I'd like to get, sure.
So just tell people a little bit more about that.
Sure. So give a shout out to my colleagues, Brent Never and Robert Christensen. We started conversations at Arnova years back, and we did a special issue of NBSQ after Lynn and Vincent died, kind of in tribute to them. But then we kept talking, and we really enjoyed working together is what the reality was. And we kept batting ideas around. And we tried to connect with the International Journal of the Commons with a piece, but that didn't get very far. So we thought we have to establish this concept and we have to lay out the contours. So we put out a thought piece, and BYU, Brigham Young University, hosted us we had a workshop like conference, and Bill came, Adela Schlager, Charlie Schweit, some familiar workshop faces. And that's what launched this book, as we were and it's just taken a long time, I would say, but it was good, careful thought going into thinking about, we've got all these phenomenal scholars who study giving money and time, and we've got all these phenomenal workshop scholars. Intellectually, let's bring them together. So it's been really fun, I would say. The conferences where we've been active were Arnova, that Bill and Cindy mentioned. The workshop on the workshop, the last one, we had some great sessions. The International Association for the Study of Commons, we've been to the one in Nairobi, and the one that we had right here in UMass Amherst. And now ISTAR, the International Society for Third Sector Research. We don't have something on the formal agenda, but it'd be great to get people together to talk. So that's kind of where we are. But I'm really thrilled to see all these faces and see, I think that Rob and Brent and I are like, oh, this book is done, and it was just a labor of love really for that one. But it's really just the beginning. We see this as the first kind of getting the ideas out there, and let's just see where they go.
We've got Rich Steinberg has had his hand up, so let me get him, and then Gustavo's got a question here. We've got about between 5 and 10 minutes remaining. Rich?
Hi, thanks for
Hi.
the talk. The main thing I want to comment on is that I think that the focus has rightly been so far on what nonprofit and philanthropy scholars can learn from the Ostrom approach. But this is a two-way dialogue, and I think there's tremendous opportunity for the people who specialize in Ostrom to learn a common language with us so that they can translate those results that really add to the analysis of institutions of private action for the public good that are so central to the Ostrom Workshop's main mission. When I heard Eleanor Ostrom give the keynote address at a nonprofit conference at Case Western one year, the nonprofit specialists were astounded by how little she knew at the time about our literature and the many ways in which we could cross-fertilize it. Brenda and her colleagues have done a good job of trying to translate Ostrom for the nonprofit scholars, but I think the opposite paper needs to be done as well. And so I'll leave it at that, given our limited time. Thank you.
That's such a great suggestion, Rich. Thank you. And I just threw this slide up because it's an important next step, is to build that bridge and have it be two-way. And so some of the things that we want to do is encourage our colleagues at the Lilly Family School to engage with things like the colloquium and research series and the Tocqueville lectures here at the workshop, and invite our workshop colleagues, affiliates, students to you can easily, it's literally a button that you click if you want to be notified of the Philanthropy Research Workshop series that the Lilly Family School holds on Tuesdays, which is a great bit of luck since Ostrom Workshop Colloquia are on Mondays and research series are on Wednesday, that in case you weren't sure what to do with all of that free time on Tuesdays, that you can attend what they call the PRW, the Philanthropy Research Workshop series at the Lilly Family School. So that's a step in the direction, but I think Rich says quite rightly, there's a lot more to be done to bring the scholarship of nonprofit scholars and philanthropy scholars over into dialogue with Ostrom Workshop scholars as well. Cindy, you've been in that space, so
it's true. It's not every Tuesday, but the PRW at the Lilly School is fantastic. It's scholars from all over. Brenda, I think you for all sorts of reasons, you've been in and around the Lilly School, and O'Neill. So you'll see that same multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary feel in the PRWs. It's very broad reaching. Before we depart, we want to, on this last slide, just mention and then ask when we get this shared space, or email Bill or me with ideas. But we have a couple in my world of conferences. The ISTR conference that was referenced already, that's happening in Lisbon in July. It's all set in terms of the formal agenda. And Allison Schnabel, who has been joining us today, is, I think, are you still?
Yep, she's
vice-elect or whatever the vice, yes. She's a big deal over at O'Neill within ISTR. And so we have a real footprint there. The Lilly School certainly does, and is also doing a pre-conference session on philanthropy in Africa, an entire session on that before the conference. So Brenda means it when there's a lot of extracurricular, if you will. So if anybody's in and around or wants to go, you can still sign up to attend that conference. one conference, the other big conference, Arnova, that was mentioned, they just opened a call for papers, and they're due like sometime in March, and it can be a colloquium, it can be paper, it can be all sorts of things. Arnova is huge. It's going to be in Philadelphia this year. It's in November. It's always the weekend
And before
Thanksgiving. It ends always on the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and it's in Philly. So that's the one that was in Indy last year. These are really good. And they're extraordinary in terms of bringing people from lots of different disciplines. You know, I often remind folks that in our field, we were only considered a field about 30 years ago. We were one of those. But we already had all of these people, similar to the conversation we're having now. We already had all these people doing work in all these spaces with different disciplines and talking to each other. And to Rich's point, who's an economist, you know, by training, et cetera, it's the same type of translation work that I've looked to do in the law. So we know it can be done, but it's hard work sometimes to get through some of the barriers on disciplines. The Ostrom Workshop and the Lilly School have that in common. No pun intended, that we actually have figured out some ways to do this. And I think doing it together, we're going to be like superpowers.
Gustavo.
Good. So I would like to contribute to this new working group with a politically incorrect question to, trigger research. What's the difference between lobbying and philanthropy? I put campaign contribution to a party, unrestricted, do whatever you want with the money to boost your chances of winning an election. I contribute money to the university, unrestricted, keep doing whatever you want, expand the programs that you want, unrestricted. Or restricted version, I contribute money to a party in exchange for favorable policy, push some agenda in Congress, whatever, or to the university. So what's the difference?
So come to my class. One of
I think it's a valid question now.
Yeah,
It is.
but I think it goes to one of the essences of what we're trying to explore here, which is I always remind people, you can give your money to whomever you want and to whatever you want. You just can't get a tax deduction for all of it unless you have the institutional overlay, that relationship with government. And the institution can't get an exemption without the government, right? But philanthropy and giving to policy, to institutions that want them to do a certain thing, or to elected campaigns or parties, you can do them all in different ways. It's really the relationship to the institution of government that really dictates the parameters around all of that. And it's one of the things that has changed a lot. In the US at least, Citizens United and some other pretty major changes in cases really did drive home, and we're seeing it again right now in real time. We have a petri dish right now going on in this country of federalism and how we think about the relationship of government to these other sectors. These are big questions, and it all comes down to the relationship of government in the US, which is not necessarily true in other countries. And many countries, a lot of the health and human services that we deal with through government and philanthropy in this country are done by government in other countries. So those are explorations on the international front. I don't want this to be only US centric, but we bring in those voices too, because people are always doing all the things you just said all over. But the relationship with government creates the enabling or the constraining environment.
Jess, did you have a comment, a question, or you want to close us out?
Well, I actually wanted to briefly chime in on this because I think it ties together something really interesting that Rich said, Gustavo said, and made me just really think about the extent to which if philanthropy is somehow private action for public good, that sounds to me a lot like the definition of cooperation in a very narrow way. So it seems like there's a lot of really interesting sort of opportunities for thinking about this question, right? To what extent is that a public good? Right, that you're contributing to, or some notion of what a pro-social outcome might be, right? And you might think of that as being a necessary component to be considered. So I don't know. This is not my area at all, but that sort of triggered this really interesting and very natural sort of like overlap thinking about what you guys are thinking.
And it's not too far from your area, given the work that you've done on stateless spaces and things like that, because collective action happens whether the government's around or not.
We have mutual aid. We have giving circles. We still, we have all those things. I have students studying all those things. that are outside the governmental realm, and they like it so most of the time.
I just want to note it is 2:00, so I also want
Yeah.
to take the opportunity to note that that's the case. I think that folks would, if you guys are available to continue the conversation casually, but I do just want to note that unfortunately, we're running out of time.
I want to thank everybody online who joined as well, and all of you for being here. I do know that for separate reasons, Cindy and I both can't hang around too much, but we're just delighted to be here and look forward to collaborating with y'all on this going forward.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.